Hello and welcome back to the Craft Beer Corner. Really appreciate you joining us today. For today's episode, we're going to be doing a review of the Stone Brewing Company's IPA Fest Pack, which is out in stores right now. It's got 3 each in the 12-pack of 4 different IPAs. So hopheads, fellow hopheads, I am decidedly one. This may well be one worth seeking. There are 4, as I stated in here. The first one is the Stone Delicious IPA. That's going to clock in at 7.7% ABV. Number 2 is the Ghost Hammer IPA. That's 6.7% ABV. Number 3 is the Hop Revolver IPA, which this is a new line of IPAs that they have out where they constantly rotate, hence Revolver. For this specific iteration, they are brewing with the Nelson Sauvin hop, and it's always a single hop. Their philosophy behind this is to let craft beer enthusiasts understand how much just a specific hop variety can impact the entire beer experience. So they brew all of them individually with a single hop. On this rotation, it's the Nelson Sauvin. This clocks in at 7.7% ABV. Then the final beer we will review is the Tangerine Express IPA, and this one clocks in at 6.7% ABV. Excuse me. Again, this is all part of the Stone Brewing IPA Fest Pack. It is a sampler pack, and it is in stores now and available through the majority of the country. So fellow hop enthusiasts, this may well be the review for you. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And we'll jump straight in with the Delicious IPA. Okay, so the first beer we're reviewing is the Delicious IPA. Again, this clocks in at 7.7% ABV. Got us a good appropriate glass here. I, for one, prescribe to the philosophy of craft beer you want to taste. Cold is the enemy of flavor and aroma with good quality beer. So I always target British cellar temperature when sampling a beer, which is give or take 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Just temperature check this one. It's right on the money. So I'm going to go ahead and get this poured into the glass. Yeah, that's got a really nice color to it. Kind of a very deep golden, slight amber hue to it on this IPA. That is classic IPA right there. Has a nice head as you'd expect. Really nice tight bubbles. I probably poured a little too vigorously at the end. Often it's up to the fault of the pourer. I am admittedly not the best beer pourer in the world, but it's going to be good enough. While I let the head settle just a bit, I'm going to go ahead and give it a sniff. Yeah, classic Stone, classic Stone. You just get hit really big in the face. It's got such a pungent aroma. It smells very, very fruity, very floral. Hints of pine from the hops in there. It's very nice. It's very pleasant. It doesn't smell astringent. So it'll be interesting to see how the balance is of fruit to pine to earthy hop notes to herbal, and just see how this all goes. Head's already settled just a little bit there. I'm going to go ahead and give this a sip. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'll tell you, Stone is just one of the best in the business, especially with their IPAs. I mean, that is just such a pleasurable experience. It's hard to put into words. Stone beers are so in your face, bold and flavorful. They are just one of the best brewers in the industry for my money. And this is just another telltale perfect example of why I believe that. This has so much flavor up front. It hits you right out of the gate. You get a nice punch of bitters. And then it just starts to slowly dissipate and expand. You get all the other flavor layering in there. You do get the fruit. I can't tell, maybe papaya. Papaya, mango. It's not citrusy. It's more exotic tropical fruit. No really hints of berries, but It's well balanced. The dominant flavor in here is the bitter, but it's balanced. It's not knock your teeth out, but it's bitter. If you enjoy a nice bitter IPA, you're probably going to enjoy this. And I think they got the name exactly right. Delicious IPA. Yeah, it is absolutely delicious. Head finally dissipating a little bit. Again, probably my sloppy pour. Beautiful color, wonderful aroma. It's got layers of complexity to it. Got a really nice body and mouthfeel. At the end, we'll come back, give it a full rating. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to our second beer, the Ghost Hammer IPA. Okay, so for our next beer, we have the Ghost Hammer IPA. This clocks in at 6.7 ABV. So let's go ahead and get this poured in the glass. Going to try to do a little bit better job of being gentle before I start to rough it up to get the head. Okay, yeah, I was a lot more gentle, but you can still see just how effervescent it is, and even as gently as I went, it still has a nice head, really nice tight bubbles on there. Color-wise, you can see the appearance is almost identical to the Delicious IPA. It is a classic, what I would deem a near picture-perfect appearance for an IPA. Let's go ahead and give it a sniff. Okay, right away I can tell you that this doesn't smell dissimilar to the Delicious IPA, but the aroma is not quite as pronounced. It smells quite a bit more fruity. Not really citrusy though. It still has kind of more tropical fruit, papaya, mango, kiwi, that kind of general aroma to it. You can see the head's already starting to dissipate, which is just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and sip this. Okay, that's a good IPA. This one actually surprises me a bit. Out of the gate, it is a lot more subtle. It's a lot smoother than the Delicious IPA was. A lower ABV, clearly fewer fermentables, obviously. ABV and fermentables in the batch are directly related, but it's still very good. Even though this one smells very strongly of tropical fruit, it doesn't really come through in the flavor profile. It's actually got a rather earthy hop profile to it, which I did not expect. And that, for me, I'm pleasantly surprised. The aroma of the hop, which I presume they did some dry hopping at the end and added some at the end of the boil, that's how you get that beautiful aroma in the beer. But it doesn't necessarily impart that flavor profile. So whatever the brewing process and technique is, on this one, it makes a really bright, fruity and floral aroma to the beer, but as soon as you sip it, it's very earthy. It's very earthy. It's got earthy hops to it. It's not pungently bitter. It's not astringent. It doesn't have any pine or resin. It's just got a nice earthy bitterness to it. And compared to the Delicious IPA, I would say this is maybe 50% max of the bitterness. Just to my own mouth. IBU's International Bitterness Units, you know, you can take those with a grain of salt. It's all relative and it's all comparative to everybody's individual palate. It gives you a baseline based on alpha acids in the beer. I didn't research this fully to find out what the IBUs or the alpha acid content may be, but I suspect it's significantly less than the Delicious IPA. Nonetheless, a very good beer. It's got a good body to it. I actually think the body is a little thicker than the Delicious IPAs, but the mouthfeel isn't quite as refined. It's a little less viscous. I don't want to say it's watery, but it's not quite as thick. But the body feels heavier, which is interesting. Considering the lower fermentables. Nonetheless, we will come at the end and give this a full rating as always, but for now let's go ahead and move on to the third beer, the Hop Revolver IPA. This is their revolving single hop beer that they do to showcase different hop varieties. In this release, it is the Nelson Sauvin variety of hops. So we'll go ahead and move on to that one. Okay, so for our next beer, we're going to be sampling the Hop Revolver IPA, which, as I stated a couple times prior, this is a rotating hop beer that Stone just rotates the variety of hop that's in it. It's one they keep out, but they just rotate the hop over and over and over. In this iteration of this beer, they are brewing it with the Nelson Sauvin hop variety. It's just a single hop IPA, so you can really experience how big of a difference each individual hop makes to a beer, what their flavor profile is, what it imparts to the beer in terms of flavor, aroma, body, the whole 9 yards. This one clocks in at 7.7% ABV. So let's go ahead and get this poured into the glass. Okay, right away, this looks almost identical to the delicious IPA that we sampled first. It's got a bit more of an amber orangish hue to it than that Ghost Hammer IPA does. 7.7, the same ABV as the delicious IPA, 1% higher than the last one. And you can tell probably the depth of color, slightly more malted malts, just longer in the process, slight golden amber hue. On the nose, it's similar to the first two, but this one smells a bit more citrusy prior to the others. I'm getting a lot more lemon and lime, maybe even some orange in there, maybe some grapefruit. It's got some grassy notes to it too, maybe lemongrass with freshly mowed grass. Not that they're related, but that's what I'm getting on the nose, maybe even just a hint of cucumber. The head, same as the priors. It's got a nice tight set of bubbles for the head, and I poured this one a little better, so it's kind of holding about for the head you'd expect from an IPA. You could say that's textbook. Let's give it a sip. And yet again, third IPA, and it's completely different. This is a lot more mellow of an IPA. The bitters are there, but only really in the background on the finish, and they're more earthy than anything else. Just a twinge of pine, but it's not resinous, it's not tarry, it's very light, it's very earthy. Not dissimilar to almost how a Fogel imparts some earthiness to the hops and just a subtle bitterness. That's what this reminds me of. In terms of the flavor, it's a good balance of fresh ripe fruit, a little bit of citrus, a little bit of pine. You get a little bit of that grassiness, but overall it's just exceptionally well balanced. Nothing really stands out. Yeah, nothing really stands out flavor-wise in terms of overpowering any of it. It's a very well balanced beer. You get some citrus, you get some fresh fruit, you get a little bit of that fresh mowed grass. It doesn't taste like grass, that's not what I mean, but it's got that flavor, like that aroma and that flavor that you get in your mouth when you're freshly mowing grass. It reminds you of that. If you've had enough IPAs, you might start to experience this. You get this with some other styles, some Gozas and Saisons, some more funky beers, and the heavy use of hops is going to impart that as well. But it's very well balanced. It's not overtly bitter, it's not overtly fruity, it's not overtly citrusy, it's just well balanced. It's got a pretty clean finish, it doesn't linger that long, but the overarching flavor that is sticking with me is that slight earthy hop bitterness. And again, it's very subtle. Nothing in this is overpowering. It's a nice clean IPA. We'll come back and give this the full rating at the end. But let's go ahead and move on to our final beer of this selection that we're sampling here. And that's the Tangerine Express IPA, which clocks in at 6.7. That's the same ABV as our second beer, the Ghost Hammer. So 2 6.7s and 2 7.7s in this IPA sampler. Let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so for the last beer that we are reviewing here in the IPA Fest Pack of Stone, it is the Tangerine Express IPA. This one clocks in the same ABV as number 2, 6.7%. So let's go ahead and get this one poured in, see how this looks. You know, this looks so similar to the rest. This is a classic IPA. It's exactly what you're looking for. That is a beautiful color. It's slightly got a more golden hue to it, slightly more orangey amber. I'm guessing that's due to the tangerine. Nice head. This head basically came out the exact same as all the others. It's a classic IPA head. Nice tight bubbles. I'm going to let that dissipate just a minute before we take a sip of this. So let's go ahead and give it a sniff. You can really smell the tangerine on that as you get your nose down in the glass. That is the overarching aroma that comes through. You can really smell it. So I expect this probably has a pretty nice tangerine back to it. I'm not sure if they use whole fruit mixed in, if they're using juice, bits of the rind, but we will find out exactly what this brings to the table. So let's have a sip. Okay, yeah, this is almost, it reminds me almost like, even though they're different, it's not dissimilar, again, just due to lower fermentables, lower ABV, less ingredients in there to kick up the alcohol for sugars in the batch. But it does remind me a bit of a mildly tangerine Ghost Hammer. And they're not identical in flavor profile, but it's got similar characteristics. You really get the tangerine on the nose. Yeah, it's very dominant, but it doesn't come through in the beer particularly heavily. You get a little tangerine just up front, and then it breaks away in a really nicely balanced bitters, as you'd expect from an IPA. It's not pungent bitter. It's not kick you in the teeth bitter. Certainly the Delicious IPA and the Nelson Sauvin Hop Revolver were significantly more bitter forward, but this is very well balanced. And the tangerine actually does come through quite nicely in the finish as it blends with the bitters. I would say overall, even though this is a tangerine IPA, it doesn't have an overly citrusy hop characteristic to it. It's actually got rather earthy hop bitters to it. There's not really much in the kind of pine and tar and resinous. It's much more earthy, akin to a fuggle, just a lot more pungently bitter. One more sip to really think about it. It has a nice complex finish to it. Got a good medium body to it too. Yeah, that's a good beer. Overall, as expected, you know, very good sampler of beers. I mean, Stone does IPAs some of the best in the business, in my opinion, and this is a perfect case example of that. Now that we've sampled all 4 beers, we'll come back and give the full score to all 4 and wrap up here. Okay, now that we have sampled all 4 beers in the Stone IPA Fest Pack, again, this is out now. This is their current IPA sampler pack. You can find this the majority of the nationwide. Total Wine, any other local craft beer supplier or store that carries Stone is a hugely popular brewer. You should be able to find these somewhere near your city. Start at the top. The very first beer that we sampled here, the Stone Delicious IPA, again, that clocked in at 7.7. Let's give it its rating. As always, the rating is based 10 points in 10 separate categories, so 0 to 100. For the aroma of this one, it was great. Hit you right out of the gate. Smelled nice and hoppy, and it did not disappoint. I gave that an 8 out of 10. The taste, this was a fantastic beer. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Well above average, borderlining on perfect. I gave that a 9 out of 10. For the body, it was very substantial for an IPA, certainly well above average. I gave that a 7 out of 10. The mouthfeel, again, body and mouthfeel tend to go often hand in hand, but they're not always identical. The mouthfeel I actually rated 1 point higher, 8 out of 10. Even though it had a nice body, the mouthfeel was really nice and viscous, and it had some substance to it, so 8 out of 10 there. The finish on this was long and complex, and I really loved it. Again, near perfect. I gave that a 9 out of 10. The head and the retention, I mean, this was textbook, perfect IPA head and retention. I gave that also a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, it was classic textbook, beautiful IPA, certainly above average. I gave that an 8 out of 10. The balance in this beer, this is where it really blew me away. There's so many layers and facets to any beer, and IPAs in particular, because the hops can be so forward and pungent, and then the interplay with the malt bill and the yeast strains used. This beer just did it exactly right. I gave the balance a 10 out of 10 in that category. It was phenomenally well balanced. The feeling and intangible category, that's my own personal, it doesn't relate to anything per se. It's just, what does this beer make me feel like while I'm experiencing it? I gave that a perfect score, 10 out of 10. I absolutely love this beer. Finally, as an example of style, almost perfection, I gave it a 9 out of 10. About as close to perfect as you can get. That brings the grand score to the Delicious IPA to 87 out of 100. A very, very high score indeed. Well above average. Absolutely recommend this beer. Moving on, number 2, the Ghost Hammer IPA. Again, that clocked in at 6.7% ABV. For the aroma, this one I wasn't really sure about out of the gate. It smelled fine, not great, not bad. I gave it the high end of average. I gave it a 6 out of 10. For the taste, again, kind of between above average and high end of average, I gave it a 7 out of 10. The body, the same thing. Again, not bad, not great, not average. It's kind of hovering there, a 7 out of 10. The mouthfeel was actually not quite as substantial. Even though I rated the body a 7, I gave the mouthfeel a 6. It hovered in the average range. I don't want to say it was watery because that's not true. It's just obviously you can tell between the first beer and this one, fewer fermentables, lower ABV. As a general rule, it's going to have not quite as nice of a body, not quite as nice of a mouthfeel, and that ring true in this case, 6 out of 10. The finish on this one was nice, above average, 7 out of 10. The head and the retention, it wasn't quite as good as it was on the first IPA, but again, it was still acceptable in the range. I gave that a 7 out of 10. The appearance didn't have that orangey amber hue, which you get in a little more fermentables, a little higher ABV IPAs. This was slightly lower. I gave it 7 out of 10. Balanced though, it was still very well balanced. All of the flavors let you experience everything that they put into the bill for this beer. You could taste it in layers, and that was again above average. I gave it a 7 out of 10. The feelings and intangible I had while experiencing it, it was a nice beer. I did enjoy it, but it didn't blow me away like the prior. I too gave this category a 7 out of 10. Then finally, as an example of the style, 7 out of 10 in this one as well. That brings the grand total on the Ghost Hammer to a 68 out of 100. It's still a good score. It's hovering above the high end of average and above average. So I could recommend it. It's a good beer. Moving on to the third beer, arguably the most interesting beer in the mix, the Hop Revolver IPA. And this specific iteration was brewed with a single hop, and this time the Nelson Sauvin hop variety. To reiterate, I already mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. This is a rotating beer that Stone has out, I believe, year-round, and they always do it to showcase a single hop. So anybody that's really into experiencing different hop varieties, seeing what they're all about, what characteristics they bring to a brew, they basically use the same recipe, but just change the hop. So you really get to know what all of these different hop varieties bring to the table. And that's the beauty of beer. There are so many different ways you can brew beer, and this is just a stellar example of how many options there are at your disposal and what all just a single hop actually brings to the table. This one clocked in at 7.7, same as our first beer, the Delicious IPA. Rating, aroma, it was great, above average, 7 out of 10. Taste, same thing, 7 out of 10. Body wasn't quite as exciting as the taste and the aroma, but still on the high end of average, 6 out of 10. The mouthfeel, I gave it the same as the body, 6 out of 10. The finish, actually, I expected a little more interplay, but it wasn't quite there. Same score, 6 out of 10. The head and the retention, this was nice. It was above average. It wasn't spectacular, but it was certainly above the average. 7 out of 10 there. The appearance, though, this was a lovely beer. I thought it had a very deep golden hue, bordering on amber. I'm not sure what malt bill they used, how roasted the malts that went into this one are, but I thought it was lovely. I gave it an 8 out of 10. The balance, this beer was very well balanced. Just like, I mean, Stone is just a fine brewery. You're not going to get many bad beers or subpar beers. The balance of this one, I gave a 7 out of 10. Again, it is cleanly above average. The feeling and the intangible that I got while experiencing it, again, above average, 7 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, again, 7 out of 10. This one did not blow me away quite like the delicious IPA, but I 100% appreciate what Stone's doing with this. And this is one of the most unique and interesting beers, I think, on the market. And they're just going to keep rotating it and rotating the hops. If you're an IPA fan or you have any interest at all in learning more about how hops impart what they impart to a beer and how much just a single hop can bring to the table in all the various facets of characteristic, I highly, highly recommend seeking these out. This is such an interesting concept for a brewery, and bravo, Stone. Excellent work. I applaud you. This is exactly what we need, and thank you for making it. Grand total score on this one, sum it all up, 68 out of 100. This is on the above average, high end of average range. It was a great beer. Not my favorite hop variety, but I really appreciated that somebody brewed with it and let you experience it in full without having any other outside mitigating factors. So great beer. I still recommend it highly. Finally, we move on to the Tangerine Express IPA, and this is the other 6.7 ABV in this pack. They had two 7.7s, two 6.7s. This is 6.7. On this one, the aroma is very enticing. You could get the tangerine out of the gate. It didn't have a lot of any other aromas that really came through, just some slight freshness of the hops, but the tangerine was overpowering, but it was still lovely. I gave it a 7 out of 10, above average. The taste, I gave it actually a point lower. I'd say it's on the high end of average. I kind of anticipated a little bit more, but the tangerine didn't come through quite as heavily as I would have liked. And other than that, it was a little tamer from lower fermentables in there, so I gave that a 6 out of 10. The body was nicer though, above average, 7 out of 10. The mouthfeel, not quite as nice as the body. Again, we're really nitpicking here, but to be fair, I got to call it how I see it. I gave it a 6 out of 10. For the finish was nice. It had many layers of complexity, and I went back and took 3-4 different sips and really thought hard on what I was experiencing. And at first I didn't get everything, but after going back and really thinking on what it is I'm tasting there, the tangerine did kind of layer upon different hop qualities and the different qualities that the malt bill brought to the table. So again, above average, I gave that a 7 out of 10. The head and retention, that was great on this one. Again, I almost feel a little bad because my very poor beer pouring skills could be part of it. And I apologize to anybody if I'm really not being fair in this category, but I have to call it how I see it and how I experienced it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. It was cleanly above average. It had a wonderful head, nice tight bubbles, and it dissipated like you'd expect to see in a good IPA. The appearance, this was a beautiful beer. The tangerine that they added in there gave it a really nice orangey amber hue. It was a beautiful beer to look at in the glass. Kind of gets your mouth watering before you even sip it. 8 out of 10 there. The balance, again, this is not unrelated to the finish for me because the finish has a lot of interplay with how the beer is balanced as the layers and layers stack. This was above average, very well balanced beer, 7 out of 10. The feeling and the intangible I had, I rated this even higher. I went 1 point up, I said 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this beer. I suspected that I would just out of the gate. The smell, the color, it builds up that anticipation and you finally get to experience it. It did not disappoint. 8 out of 10, great score there. Finally, as an example of the style, I've had many, many different fruit IPAs. This is above average. I gave it a 7 out of 10. And that brings the grand score on this one up to a 71 out of 100. And thus concludes the current Stone Brewing Company's IPA Fest Pack. This is out in stores now. I highly recommend it if you're a fan of IPAs, if you're a fellow hophead. This will not disappoint. Stone, I stand by, is one of the best brewers that there is, period. They are super consistent. They're constantly thinking up new and inventive ways to bring beer and keep it fresh and bring it to the market for people to enjoy. And they just do an exquisite job. Bravo as always, Stone Brewing. And everybody, I do appreciate you tuning in today. Thank you very much for joining us here. I know these can run long and it's a lot of information, but I hope that you at least get to take away something that's useful to you, either if you're just getting into craft beer, or if you're a long time into craft beer, you're a fellow connoisseur, and maybe you don't have the means to go out and try all these different beers. Hopefully I'm bringing some information that's useful to you. If you find it useful, you find it entertaining, you want to stay current in current beer news, beer reviews, beer news, beer samplings. We have a lot more in store coming to the channel. We're going to be doing beer and food pairings. We're going to be doing reviewing of homebrewing equipment, recipes, the whole 9 yards. So please do consider liking us and subscribing, and you can follow us if you want, and you'll be up to date as we release our episodes. To start, we are planning to release 2 per week, so there's going to be a lot more content coming your way. As always, I thank you so much for joining us here, and keep it beer, keep it craft. Cheers. We'll see you on the next one.